Well, let's talk about this now to the independent property analyst Andrew Teacher, who's here with us in the studio. So David Cameron talking about lots of cut-price homes for first-time buyers. What's your view on it?
I think what we need to have is a proper national plan which sets out what homes we need for what people, and have a policy which is actually linked in to healthcare, to education, so that we can draw a ring round a part of the country and go, right, that place is going to have lots of computer graduates in 10 years' time. How do we house them? Now, currently what we have is a lot of bitty around-the-edge policy which serves to generate some good media headlines, which the coalition's been very successful at driving today, but is simply rather light on the detail. And what they've said today is that they will fund essentially a 20% discount in new homes for people under 40 by doing away with the development levies that developers have to pay. And what that means in English is that there'll be less affordable housing, less cash for councils to build vital infrastructure, and as a result of that, certain people whose earnings actually aren't capped by what they've said today will get a discount. So that could mean that if you're under 40 and are earning £150,000 working for a bank, you could potentially get a discounted home, and many would say that that's not quite fair.
People say there is a dire housing crisis in this country that is simply getting worse and worse each year.
Well, that's an affordability crisis. We're not seeing homeless people stacking up on the streets. What we're seeing is that growing regulational changes around mortgages, that the increasing house prices is making it harder for people to purchase homes. Now, I think that one thing we need to consider as a nation is whether ownership at all costs is the real and correct way to pursue things. Now, there is
it's the dream for a lot of people.
But so is owning a Ferrari, and it's not to say that the two are necessarily the same thing, but there's certainly a viewpoint which says we should incentivise more rental, and what the government has very successfully done is introduced what's called a build-to-rent fund, and that's basically cash to encourage large institutions such as pension funds to build homes which will be rented out over the long term. And there are many companies that are coming through, companies like Essential Living, which have got 8 schemes across London, and these guys will basically build stuff, flats to own, that will be rented out over the long term. And what that could mean for people is a real game shifter in viewing housing much more as a service, where there's much more like the hospitality industry is, housing as a service rather than solely as a massive grinder of debt that continues to amass mortgage and household debt past what we've seen.
So this
before.
is a debate, isn't it, that goes back to Margaret Thatcher, really, the idea of the right to buy. And people do feel there is a right to buy, a right to own.
And clearly there is, but I guess where the counter view is whether that right to own should be at the expense of taxpayers. And I think what we've seen over the last 10 years is an unprecedented change in the rental market, in the literally numbers of renters has doubled in this country. Now, at the same time, house prices, particularly in the southeast, have also increased, to levels we've not seen before. And what that tells you is two things. It tells you that renting is here to stay, and we need to deal with it, whether anybody likes it or not. And secondly, that the affordability problem with housing isn't going to go away. And until such a mythical time as a politician stands up on the stage and goes, we want to drive down house prices, nothing's going to happen. And certainly no Conservative politician, because of the Margaret Thatcher point, is going to stand up and go, we want house prices to drop. But until that happens, we're not going to see a change. So I think the 3 solution points here are a proper national plan that takes things away from NIMBY councils who often don't want development to happen. I think we need a step change in viewing renting and renting from the corporate sector as a much more valued option. And I think thirdly as well, we need to do away with simple solutions which seem to pose these one-off solutions as a silver bullet to what's essentially a much larger problem.
All right, good to talk to you, Andrew Teacher there, independent property analyst. Thanks for coming in.